some of our public speakers referred to tonight, we have indeed been involved in the process of collaborating with the community on redistricting, as we've noted repeatedly in many different formats, in writing, online, in public forums, face-to-face, in school messenger calls. We put out an initial plan for a redistricting committee, which had representation from many schools, including Jefferson High School. And that committee came up with a set of proposals which they put out. We got a great deal of feedback from the community. We came back to this board and they took all of the feedback that they received, which was also posted online after removing people's identifying information, their names and their emails. And the board said, we'd like for you to go back and consider making these revisions. So we took all of that data back to the redistricting committee and asked them to consider some changes. So among those changes, and we're sort of going to go through them in order. First and foremost, they asked us to look at some changes at elementary to reduce the number of students who would be affected by redistricting. And they asked us to do a couple of things. Number one, they said, can you please look at preschool? And these are, I give these in a particular order. Number one, removal of preschools. Those students don't have any previous experience with our school system. We would not be changing their trajectory in any way by pulling those out of our schools. And we have the capacity to take those in private and other settings at schools that are below 85% without having an effect on their placement. That in particular would have an effect on South Jefferson, Ranson, Driftwood, and North Jefferson. One of the other things that the board asked us to look at is an increase in capacity, meaning our issue is about having X number of seats and then having too many children to fill all of those seats. So one of the things that you can do to increase capacity, you can add trailers, or you can increase the number of places designated in your school as actual classrooms by taking things out, like a music room or an art room or a computer lab. So one of the suggestions that came in actually from a citizen was, hey, if you do the same thing that you did at Jefferson, pull out the computer lab and do laptops on carts, you've bought yourself another classroom, you've increased your capacity by 25 students. And the third thing that the board asked us to look at is what we tried to nicely refer to as decreasing the non-native population, meaning if you're not zoned for that school, decreasing the number of transfers into that school. If you don't own a home in that zone, prioritizing the folks who do live there and phasing out the transfers. So, and I will sort of walk you through this because this is just elementary at this point. All of these things you've seen before. Here's a list of all the elementary schools, whether they're high growth or low growth, number of kids they have in them right now, preschools they have in them, what their capacity is, how many students they'll hold, and what percentage they're at. And then these are their projections for next year, meaning we take their, bless you dear, we take their 5th grade out, we do the average of their last 2 years of kindergarten and then put that in for next year. So we project how many kids they're going to have in them next year. And so this is what their percentage is projected to be next year. So where you see it says options, we sat down and for every single school we worked through what would doing that option look like? What kind of time would it buy you? What kind of space would it buy you in the school? So the very first option, and we put them in a particular order on this for a reason. The very first option is to remove pre-K. You displace no one who's already there. It costs you nothing. We have space to do it. That is a fairly easy solution. However, as we noted in previous presentations, the only 2 schools that were over 85%, Ransom's projected to be at 89 next year, and South Jefferson was projected to be at 91 next year. Those were the only 2 schools that had preschool classes in them that it would have an effect of moving those out. So moving it out of Ranson would take them down to 84%. Moving it out of South Jefferson would take them down to 86%. Now I will note, South Jefferson actually has 2 types of preschool classes in it, only one of which we are actually proposing removing. There is a Head Start class there. which has a different set of criteria, different set of equipment, including playground equipment and some specialized things that they've done at the school to accommodate that group. We are not talking about moving them, we're talking about moving the preschool class that we have control over. Then in the next column, we said, okay, so that's preschool. What's the next thing that we could do that would not increase our cost, but would allow us to get some breathing room in our schools? And that is transfer policy, meaning the board had proposed any school that is at 85% or more, we maintain people who are already in the school on transfer, meaning if you're already there, we're not going to kick you out. But as kids age out, so this year's fifth graders move out, say you're at Shepherdstown Elementary School, which doesn't have a preschool for us to take out. That doesn't help us there. But if you're at Shepherdstown Elementary School, you only have 3 fifth graders who are on transfer who will be leaving this next year. That doesn't buy you an enormous amount of space. So what we did is we went through and said, year 1, here's where you would be at. If we took the rising fifth graders out, they age out, and we don't take in more transfers at your school, here's what your percentage would be at. Now, I will point out, although there wasn't enough room on this chart, we did that 4 years out until everybody who's currently in there now is out. And at the end of 4 years from now, Shepherdstown Elementary School ends up at 90% if all of those transfers come out. Okay. The last thing we did is we said, okay, we went through the schools and said, how many computer labs do you have that we could remove the lab, make that a classroom, and put laptops on carts? So, of course, we had some interesting input from the public, as we always do. I got this, well, how about you rip out the 3 computer labs that are over at Shepherdstown Elementary? Well, they actually have 1 computer lab. They have 1. So what we did is we sat down with our TERFs, our technology resource facilitators, and we went school by school. And I actually went, where is Mr. Walter in here? Oh, so I was at Mr. Walter's, and we walked through we actually walked through the computer labs, and we say, how much space do you have in here? How many computers do you have? How many laptops? What size classroom could we make this? For instance, at Ranson's, we could fit a full 20 kids in that class. However, in Mr. Walters, that was not quite as big a computer lab. We couldn't put 25 kids in that classroom. So we only counted the actual number of kids that we could put in that classroom. We were, I will say, principals had already done the hard work of putting computer labs in the least desirable classrooms, the smallest classrooms that we had, in most cases, simply because they were trying to max out for space anyway. So in the schools where we could remove a computer lab and replace it with a cart, we gave what the cost of that was. As you can see, for a full cart and the 36 laptops to fill it is $9,933. So we costed out for all of these schools what that would cost. Now, not all of these schools. So for instance, Blue Ridge campus, they're sitting at 54%. We're not advocating that we go and spend $30,000 putting their computer labs onto carts, right? The only schools where we're advocating doing that are places where without it, we would still be over 85%. For instance, Ranson Elementary School, we could, if we removed the preschool class, just get it down to 84%, okay? Or at South Jefferson, we removed the preschool and we're still up over 86%. They have 2 computer labs. If we were to take both of those out, it would be at a cost of $19,866. Now, each one of these are done independently, just removing preschool, just transfer, just increase capacity. This last column is if I do all of those things, where do we get everybody? And the good news is, for just under $50,000, we get every single school in elementary school. Let me check myself. Every single elementary school that we have at 85% or less, with a single exception. Mr. Jacobson, you are the lucky golden ticket winner of the only school we have that would be at 95%. Now, when we sat down with the redistricting committee and went through all of these options, part of the discussion was the board, and I think that you had brought this up, Mr. Osborne, there's nothing magical about 85%. We utilized that percentage because that is the recommendation of the school building authority, and we didn't want to randomly select a percentage point. However, the board has the capacity and the authority, as long as you remain within the fire marshal's limits of what a building can hold, we could float 100%, 102%, as long as you don't exceed that capacity. So the committee's recommendation was that with this and implementation of the transfer policy, that within 4 years, Shepherdstown Elementary School would be down to 90%. And currently, if we implement all of those features, we would be able to keep all of our elementary districts intact with no redistricting, and at least within the next 4 years, be able to keep everybody under 90%. Which we think would hearten a great many people so they wouldn't have to move out of their district. And that $49,665 would be a one-time expenditure on those and not an annual expenditure.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, please do.
With the computers, with schools that have extra capacity, do they already have the cows? Is it the kind of thing that we could make an extra computer lab at an empty school and take cows from there so we wouldn't have to buy new laptops?
That is a good question. That is a very good question. Yes, that is a possibility. We haven't gotten that far yet. This was a good deal for spring break, but over Christmas break. But
Right.
yes, that is a possibility where we could go to the schools that say you're right, Denny, and you're going to give up your static computer lab for a cow. Could we go to another school and say, give me your cow, and we'll give you all of their desktops if you've got a room for a computer lab? Yes, we certainly could. That's a great suggestion.
And they're not, old computers because of the fact that they're all virtual anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. Right?
I know, and the teachers in the audience laugh. There is some fairly significant variation across the schools in the age of our computers. They do all have the same minimum capacity. They all have to have the capability of running Office 365, which is the state's virtual office program, that's what our students use. Now, some of the schools do, and the only caveat to this is we do have schools that run specialized programs, like we have Reasoning Minds, which is a special math program that we use just at 2 elementary schools that got grant funding to be able to do those. So we would have to check and say, okay, if you have some specialized instructional program that's needed, I need to make sure that whatever we shifted over could cover that. But yes, ma'am, we could certainly explore that.
Okay, thank you.
To reduce our costs. So here were several of the alternate proposals that the committee worked through that were suggested that we explore these ideas. And the red circles are danger, Will Robinson. It means we worked through them and found something where we're like, this is probably not the ideal solution. So the first one of those was to get Denny's population smaller, particularly because they did not have a preschool class for us to take out and only one computer lab. And they are sitting right at 84%, even with doing everything. Whether or not we can move the 3rd grade down to Paige Jackson, and the answer to that is no. That would push Paige Jackson up to 111. I know. Did your heart just stop? That would push Paige Jackson up to 111%, and we absolutely do not recommend that. One of the suggestions for Shepherdstown Elementary School, and this is a consideration, and it would get you down lower than the 95%. It would still not get you down to 85, however, is whether or not we can move Shepherdstown Elementary School's 5th grade up to Shepherdstown Middle School. So if we did that under the current boundaries, it would push Shepherdstown Middle School up to 76%, and it would still be at 89% for Shepherdstown Elementary School. It's just a very full school right now with large upcoming classes. We got the suggestion of hey, since the high schools are really the greatest imbalance, that's really what precipitated this, hey, it's getting pretty crowded, we need to be able to move things around to get everyone to a certain percentage. What if we just put the 9th grade back to middle school, and that would buy you some space in the high schools? So we went through that exercise. If we took the current 8th graders that are moving up and then kept them down in the middle schools and just let the 6th grade come up. And the reality is that we'd still have to redistrict middle schools. Wildwood Middle School would be at 107% capacity. And in both of those suggestions, as those of both parents and educators, once we start making the band of kids developmentally too large in a school, we start running into issues of segregating them by developmental level of our core facilities, meaning you have a whole extra grade level that has to have lunch and has to have PE and has to have, we run into some logistics and scheduling issues with those. So those were not recommendations of the committee. And one of the alternate proposals was that rather than, if you remember the original redistricting proposal, here's Jefferson County, here's sort of the line, all up here, north goes to J High, south goes to Washington High, and the committee chose the tact of going along the border and picking off certain neighborhoods to sort of like raise the line and pull more kids down to Washington High. And the question came up, why did you go past Ranson to pull all of those down instead of just taking Ranson Elementary and placing all of them at Washington High? And at the time, the issue was middle school. It creates somewhat of a significant imbalance at middle school. As Ms. Frame pointed out earlier, that would place Charlestown Middle School at 771 students, more than double what Wildwood Middle and Shepherdstown Middle would be at. So we are going to talk through a couple of other proposals. One of the proposals that came up that the board asked us to explore as well, speaking about this middle school level, was we had some folks who had concerns about why do you take kids and drive them past Charlestown Middle School to take them out to Harpers Ferry Middle School. And Ms. Ogden at the time had a good suggestion to explore where we were really doing a geographic, you always go to your closest middle school. Based on our road systems, here's the line, here's the closest middle school. And I will say that solution is both prescient and brilliant, and it will work really, really well in about 12, 15 years when we build another middle school. Right now, the issue is really that it would have an even more significant effect. It would place Charlestown Middle School at 843 students and place Harpers Ferry Middle School at 372. And given in particular, the Harpers Ferry is where all our capacity is. It'd be at 35% of its full capacity. We really, some of this is just for reasons of culture and finance and opportunity. We've built out a lot of capacity over here, and we keep having this discussion, but our capacity is over here on the edge of the county, and our population's in the center of the county, and so we have to make some difficult solutions about either we have got to push people out to fill up the capacity in those, or we say, oops, here's where all the people are, and we build more capacity in here, and there's cost to that. Or some combination of those things. So that's sort of what we're working through right now. Trailers, yes, which also come at a cost.
No, I don't have any money.
Right. So here, the Ranson to Washington High School, we actually have 4 separate solutions off of that, little different changes for the board to consider based on what their request was to the committee. In the very first one, Ranson goes all to Charlestown Middle School, Charlestown Middle School goes all to the, and we will put this online, I promise you. It'll be up tomorrow. All to Charlestown Middle School and then all to Washington High School. And as you can see, that has a pretty significant effect on Charlestown Middle School. Well, what if you left all of Ranson to Wildwood Middle and then they went to Washington High School? Well, then you just flip-flop the problem, because then Wildwood Middle School's up at 82% and Harpers Ferry's down at 49, 57%.
I don't get that one. In Ranson already at Wildwood, right?
It is, but this is, again, you guys are at 80+% already. It doesn't change
Oh,
your
this
percentage.
is just normal. This is just.
This is
projection.
normal, only they would then go to the Washington High School.
Oh.
And then what we show is what the high school effect would be. If you, whether you sent them through Charlestown Middle or you sent them through Wildwood Middle, the high school effect would be that Washington High would be at 88% and Jefferson High would be at 79%. Now, we did get a question from the board about free and reduced lunch rates, about the socioeconomics of making that shift. And the reality is that, as one of our speakers pointed out tonight, currently Ranson Elementary School has the highest percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch of any school in our system. So when we took those students, if we pull them out of Jefferson's population and put them into Washington High's, and we recalculated their free and reduced lunch rate, J High would go from 33.74% free and reduced lunch down to 29.27, and Washington High would go up from 29.18 to 33.77. Almost a complete flip from one to the other. So the committee got to work knowing that this was something that the board had recommended and asked of them. Each one of those single flows creates an issue going through to the middle school. But at the high school level, we also wanted you to show you the difference between doing it all at once, and as the board had stated, you wanted it over a 4-year period gradually. So we showed you year by year how the percentages would shift between Washington High and Jefferson High if you did it 1 year at a time and slowly brought those students in. And as you can see, it starts off Washington High at 79 and J High at 88, and then by the 4th year, Washington High's at 86% and J High's at 75%. Now, one of the things that we will have noted, yes, we do have a little 9/11 bubble that goes through there. So between 525 and 727 that year, we had 145 kids compared to the 101 during the same time period. So we had like a little larger group that goes through there, and they end up coming out at the end of that period. So, knowing that the Ranson option's greatest limitation was if you send them through one middle school to get to the high school, you either overburden Wildwood Middle or you overburden Charlestown Middle. Committee came back and said, okay, well, another solution is you can split Ranson Elementary School. You keep them intact in elementary school, but for middle school, one side goes off to Charlestown Middle School and the other side goes off to Wildwood Middle School. So here's the railroad tracks, an easy delineating marker. This side, 52 students to Wildwood Middle School because it is the more crowded of the two schools. And then this side, 105 students to Charlestown Middle School. So what that would do is percentage-wise, it would even these out. Now, numbers-wise, you have to understand, this is what capacity means. That would put 719 students at Charlestown and 421 at Wildwood Middle, but they'd only be 2 percentage points apart in capacity. Charlestown Middle School is physically, it was built as a high school. It is physically a much bigger school. It holds a lot more students. It would also, however, make some changes in the free and reduced lunch rate. So at Charlestown Middle, it would raise it from 28.64 to 33.37, and at Wildwood, because currently you would simply be adding that group of students. So we wouldn't be taking anyone out of Charlestown Middle School. You take that population and you add that number of students with their free and reduced lunch rate. It's a greater concentration of them. Mm-hmm. And I will say at Wildwood Middle School, just the joy of statistics, you would actually have fewer overall number of students and fewer students who receive free and reduced lunch, but because your overall number is smaller, the concentration is actually higher. Your percentage goes up slightly from 48.25 to 49.8. But you do actually have both fewer overall students and fewer students who receive free and reduced lunch.
Can you help me with the math? I'm really bad at that.
Okay, first of all, it's not a physics lesson. I can help you, not in the middle of this, but yes. So part of this too is we showed you how it changed the free and reduced lunch rate. This is them splitting at middle school and everyone coming back to Washington High School. So the fourth option is that they split at the middle schools as we showed you, and then they stay split. If you go to Wildwood Middle, you go on to Jefferson High. If you go to Charlestown Middle, you go on to Washington High. If you do that, then Washington High ends up at 85% and J High ends up at 83%. With the difference in ROTC, they'll end up about equal. And then when it comes to free and reduced lunch rates, J High would drop by only a little over a percentage point, 33.74 to 32.05, and Washington High would go up slightly from 29.18 to 34.35. Now, I will note that in all of this work, the committee worked through every single one of these different possibilities, and as the spokesperson for the committee to the board, they did convey they continue to believe that the original proposal to the board was their choice of proposal. Should the board not deem that what they want and they wish to have the Ranson one be considered, of the four options on the Ranson one, this one was the choice of the committee. And I will say it was fairly the choice of the committee. There was an enormous amount of discussion because there's been a very strong desire on the part of the committee to keep communities intact, to keep social groups intact, and not to split schools, split feeder patterns. However, of the four options on Ranson, rather than the borderline, that was the initial, this was the number one choice of the committee out of the four. And also, in speaking with transportation, one of the things to commend this proposal over the original proposal is that the transportation costs would be far less because it is a much smaller, more concentrated area. If we have to go through and double pick up kids as you move them up one grade level at a time, it is a much smaller area for us to pick up from than that pulling them from all across the border as we move the line up. Does that make sense? Okay. So, some other things that the board asked us to consider and bring them back, some ideas. Number one, transfer policy. They wanted us to consider phasing in the transfer policy just as they wanted to any high school redistricting, meaning anyone who currently, as of the first day of school this year, 1/3/2017, if you have a transfer, you keep it. Subject to our normal rules. Don't get thrown out of school. Pay your lunch bill. Come to school every day. But with those, you would stay. And what we would do is we would annually calculate the capacity of every building, and we would post up a list publicly. And once the list is posted, we would say these are schools that are available for transfer. Any school that's at 85% or more, there would be no opportunity to transfer into that school. That would go for siblings. That would go for folks who had their myriad of, as there always is, child care issues. If the school's at capacity, there's no additional transfers into that school.
Employees?
Getting there. Thank you. So, number two, the JCS staff would retain their placement benefit. We heard very clearly from the board and their desires, and when we went through and calculated for you what percentage of transfers were our actual employees, it was just under 14%. They do not constitute the bulk of those. And we heard very clearly from our employees having lost a good many benefits over the years as we've struggled fiscally and already at a fiscal disadvantage to some of our neighbors in terms of competition for staff. We felt that this was a benefit that needed to be extended to them. So they would not be subject to transfer, meaning that as long, that benefit would remain intact for all of our staff. If you work at Jefferson High and you want your child to go to TA Lowry, then you have to notify us by a certain date. 12/1 is the proposed date. We'd have to set a new one for this year, an interim one for this year. They would simply be counted in the native population of that school. Okay. As Mr. Osborne had pointed out previously, and the rest of the board was in agreement that kindergarten should be included. They'd have the same rights to transfers grades 1 through 8 with the same timelines, with one notable exception. We do not get kindergarten registrations sometimes until people see the bus go by. They're like, oh, that's right, you should be in school now. And then they come and register. So with everyone else, if you put in for a transfer, if you put in for a transfer to a school that's open for transfer, we would notify you in June. For kindergarten, we would notify you 1 week before the start of school, because we simply have people coming in and registering all summer long. Out of county and out of state would be subject to board approval and requirement for tuition payment for any non-JCS staff. And we showed you last time the state tuition payment and what a county tuition payment would look like. And transportation, and this has been a subject of discussion. There would be no transportation for any transfer or an employee placement student. We have gotten some feedback from staff already who are very interested in us allowing them to utilize JCS transportation should they have the benefit of placing their students in a school. But this would be out for public comment for the next 2 weeks. Both the redistricting suggestions would be out. The committee's suggestion is to have them out for another 2 weeks until the January 23rd meeting for public comment. Send a school messenger home to every parent, as we did last time, and have the transfer policy up for public comment for the same time period. So each one of those decision points, the elementary capacity point, our capability with some limited fiscal investment, and perhaps even less with your suggestion, to be able to get every single elementary school at 85% or below, with the exception of Shepherdstown Elementary School. Pre-K movement, the committee stands behind their original suggestion for high school reconfiguration, but we've given the board 4 more options and conveyed to the board which of those 4 options the committee recommends. Transfer policy here and the transportation route reconfiguration, which I see several of the transportation folks here want to continue to be very, very crystal clear. We need more bus drivers, not less. Part of this transportation route reconfiguration is because we cannot get enough bus drivers. We have 7 open positions right now, and some of our thought is that if we can consolidate some routes, that's not to take anyone's position. We have more than enough jobs for everyone. What we don't have is enough substitutes. We're doubling drivers up. And our mechanics are running bus routes every single day, so they're not there to fix buses. Our routers are running bus routes every single day, so they're not doing their main jobs. So part of this is for us to have some relief for our bus drivers as well. And with that, I will certainly entertain any questions from the board about the task you assign us or the transfer policy.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Thank you, Ms. Skinner, for running the meeting. Questions, colleagues?
With an updated proposal that they're looking at as far as the Ransom area, with that affecting basically Wildwood and Charlestown, does that mean that there would be no changes made to the other middle schools because there wouldn't be necessary? I didn't notice how those other demographics would change.
Currently, the only other changes that would be proposed to those is whether or not the board supported the suggestion of moving the 5th grade up from Shepherdstown Elementary to Shepherdstown Middle School, which was not suggested by the committee, but is always an option. And it would, that would then negate, because the original middle school movement was the feeder patterns through to the high schools. So it would negate any change to the feeder pattern for Harper's Ferry or for Shepherdstown Middle School.
And right now, the feeder pattern without a change is about, what, 50/50 approximately
For what?
at Harper's Ferry?
Harper's Ferry is at about 52%. I think it's 52, it might be 54. Right now, they're at about 54%, mostly because of the addition of the 10 extra classrooms when the school was renovated.
But is it, as far as what
Wait a
goes to Washington, what goes to?
Oh,
split.
no, it's not quite 50-50. 52. No. She said how many go to Washington and how many go to Jefferson out of Harper's Ferry.
Yeah, it's about 52% that goes from Harper's Ferry, the split between the two high schools, 52 and 48.
Oh,
Okay.
Just a minute.
Sam's gonna go there. She got redistricted last time, so that's why I thought I knew that number.
Okay,
but I
you do.
was trying to make sure I
You've had
remembered
kids
it.
redistricted about 4 times,
Yes,
right?
I was trying to
You're the
keep track
expert
of all
here.
these schools. Okay, all right. And then the other issue I had was, or question I had was about transfer policy with childcare. What is the committee's opinion on then if I am, wherever I live, but the person that I've had for childcare forever lives blank? Obviously, that's where my kid gets on the bus and goes to school. How does that change? Or is that still part of the policy that, obviously you have to have documentation that, yes, that's an actual childcare provider. I don't know how we do that, but how do you not, what if you can't find a babysitter in your area? How does that work?
Again, the proposal is that as long as that school has capacity, let's say I want to send my child I live at South Jefferson, but my babysitter lives here in the middle of Charlestown, and I want him to go to Wright Denny. If Wright Denny's at 84% and they can take 12 more kids, and I get in, great. If I don't, then no. Once it hits 85%, we would deny all of it.
The way it is now, if a current student is a daycare provider, they would be grandfathered in for the rest of their elementary
Right, if they're
school.
already if they already have a transfer. That was one of the wishes of the board. We calculated the transfer effect on there based on that criteria of if you're grandfathered in, if you're already in.
Just out of curiosity, with the transfers that we have now, you have to reapply every year, is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, you certainly do.
What percentage of those transfer applications get renewed every year? Do people get denied on a regular basis?
Yes, we do.
So if a student went to a school,
A couple of parents are like, yes, we do.
if a student went to a school for first and second and third grade, and then all of a sudden fourth grade, there's no room, do we deny that, or?
Yes. It happens less frequently at the upper grades. We do tend to be far heavier at kindergarten, first and second.
Your class size expands.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens is, in the upper grades, we can push up to 28 kids in a class. When you can't put any more than 20, it limits you.
I feel very strongly about us providing transportation for Jefferson County employees.
Yes, sir.
If we allow them to transfer, if we have somebody that's teaching at Charlestown Middle School and they want their child to go to a specific elementary, I think would be very difficult to say, well, tough luck, you teach early.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, so we can certainly make that amendment.
I'm not sure I understand that. I guess I assumed that in most cases, a teacher is requesting a transfer so that the student ends up at the school they're at.
That's not necessarily how it's written now.
That was the original proposal, and we expanded it based on feedback from the board and from the public. We expanded it to any Jefferson County school.
It would have very little or no cost to the school system to do that.
It is a very, very small number. Yes, sir. Very, very small number.
Because essentially, most people then have a babysitter in that specific area, or a grandparent or something, or they provide the transportation themselves.
Most of them it's at the school that they're at, but there are a number of them that,
Very
most
few.
of them, they want their kids at the school where
Exactly.
they teach at, but the few that don't,
Very
they
few.
would be a very small
Very
percentage.
small percentage of the 14%.
Yes, sir.
I think it's not worth, I agree, I think it's the right thing to do.
Any other questions from the board? We will, oh, yes, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions right now? So, one thing, when I looked over this, that I wasn't completely, well, there are several things. First of all, I see some people were very busy over the holidays, and thank you. This was not easy, running all these scenarios. But one scenario that I think we're interested in seeing, and maybe it's here and I don't see it, and that is the scenario where you take the plan that was originally presented and you scale back some of the neighborhoods that I think you suggested. And you look at the transfer policy and you make no other changes.
We did do that at elementary. Mr. Osborne's suggestions in particular were at the Shepherdstown Elementary
No,
area for those, yeah. But not totally, no, sir. At the high school level, yes, sir, we did not make changes to that original plan. We did configure, and we can bring that back to the board, what it would look like over 4 years in terms of the number shifting. We did not go back through that original plan and pull out individual select neighborhoods.
Yeah, Breckenridge had in the meeting that you were supposed to develop an alternative.
So I was thinking, and I may have misunderstood the suggestion, but I was thinking that we were going to look at, you take the plan as proposed, based on some input regarding communities of interest, proximity to schools. You removed some of the neighborhoods that were proposed for change.
Breckenridge,
Deerfield, there were one or two others. And then you look at what the impact is of that from K through 12. And with the grandfathering existing high school students, to see what that impact is, and whether, I realize obviously it wouldn't get us to 85% across the board, particularly for the high schools, but how far off is it?
we can calculate that as well. I would say,
And,
taking out the neighborhoods that you discussed would
Did I misunderstand?
be a significantly lower number.
That's what I suggested.
Okay, that's what I thought, but
I would like to see that.
We can have that for you.
Weren't like half of the high school kids in that one neighborhood, though?
It will be a very small number, but we can run it for you, yes. So I apologize, my understanding was.
And you
that
say,
there was
are you talking about
Renton.
Breckenridge?
Yeah.
Yes.
It
It was such a significantly large number between the neighborhoods that you named that.
I'm sorry,
I
can
was
we,
sitting-
can we please keep down the, so that we can hear and the superintendent and you all can hear us? I appreciate it.
So we can certainly go back and calculate that. The neighborhoods that you gave us are, in particular Breckenridge, but with the others is a significant portion of the students that were being moved. So we can go back and calculate, taking these neighborhoods out but leaving the others, what that would look like. Yes, sir. Bring that to you.
And thinking back, and I'm sure the committee thought about this at the very outset, but I mean, I guess at the end of the day, if you're trying to balance the numbers as best as possible, if you set as a premise to not increase anyone's bus time, that you're not necessarily going to reach that goal. Because, for example, we know that Breckenridge, at least as the crow flies, it certainly looks significantly closer to Jefferson than it does to Washington. So I presume that the bus time is significantly different. And if you took as a premise, we want to try to right this ship, but we want to do so without expanding bus time. That would have some impact on how you think about this
Would.
plan.
Yes, sir, that would have a significant impact, in which case, certainly the Ranson proposal would fit that premise far better, and as we noted, I'm not sure if you were in here at that point, that proposal has significantly reduced transportation costs over the original proposal, based on the density of that population and their proximity to Washington High School.
The only other thing that I have any interest in seeing, besides that piece and being able to hash through this for a while first, is the Out 51, where you have Barleywood and some of those other neighborhoods, who have, some of the parents actually asked, why am I going all the way over here and why am I not going over here, and those kinds of things, that it seems like a logical movement to maybe look at an addition of that, a piece of that property or a piece of that 51.
Going further up there.
Going further
down
up,
to Washington.
because that would again then limit their bus time. But also, again, that I get those questions more than any other question. Why do I live here and go all the way to Wildwood and Jefferson when I should be going to Charlestown and Washington? Because I have to go right by it when I come into town. I mean, I don't know if that's even a possibility, but I know that, to me, every time we've heard any disagreements, the only thing positive we always hear was, thank goodness, that's like logical, and it never made sense to me to begin with. So at least to have those numbers and see what or what not that changes would be my
We see
only
how
other thought.
how far we would go before we start getting so much closer to Jefferson
Right.
High that it doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
the ones out on the outliers doesn't make any sense. You still got to go one or the other, but up that road, at least a short period of it seems to make more sense.
I'm not sure how many students we can capture off of that, but we can
Yeah.
plot that out and see.
And it might not even be enough that it makes so much of a difference. It's just a logical, long-term decision. So we do it now with this redistricting piece instead of not doing it.
Although, and the committee does continue to make their recommendation to the board that rather than doing this once a decade, we perhaps have a committee every other year who looks at, particularly if we continue to grow at the 70-plus students a year clip on average, it makes sense that every other year we would make more minor adjustments along the way rather than these sort of large-scale